Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me okay, and if you can't, just use your chat box to let us know. Welcome to Wild Apricot's Expert Webinar Series. Today we are thrilled to have Alison Fine join us. She's a best-selling author and social media expert, and she's going to be talking to us about her new book called Matterness, What Fearless Leaders Know About the Power and Promise of Social Media. So we're looking forward to that. But while we're still waiting for people to just get logged in here, I'm going to introduce myself. My name's Laurie Smith, also known as Smiley Apricot. I'm the community manager here. And on our chat, we have Farhad Chiklawala, also known as the Professor. He's our marketing content assistant. And Lori Halley's also listening in and may speak up a little later. She's our blog writer, and we'll be writing a nice follow-up blog post about this. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So I'm happy to present Alison Fine, and I'm actually a longtime fan of Alison because she really is one of the preeminent guides to social media. She's been chronicling this shift that social media has created in the way that we communicate with our members. And she's actually the co-author of The Networked Nonprofit, which is actually a series of books with Beth Kanter, and I've read it from cover to cover, and I'd encourage you to do the same. It's an amazing book if you're trying to figure out how to use social media for your organization. And she's also the author of an award-winning book called Momentum, which is about using social media for social change. And today she's here for her newest book on what she's calling Matterness. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to make your members feel like they really matter. So I'm going to take Alison off mute here, and hopefully her sound's working okay. Alison, are you with us?
I am, Lori. Thank you for having me this afternoon.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to switch presenter control over to you. There'll be a slight delay. Let me try that again. All right, and just try clicking through to the next slide. You should have control now. There you go. All right.
There we go.
Thank
you. So, Lori, I wanted to start with a story that happened a few months ago to me. This is my mailbox. It's not my mailbox put together. It is my mailbox after a windstorm where the top of the box actually blew off and landed right on that slate. Just as you can see it right there, that's exactly how I came out after the storm and saw it. And so I went inside and I ordered a new mailbox that was going to come in about 2 weeks or so. After a few days, my husband and I realized that we weren't getting any mail. So he went down to the post office and asked to speak to the postmaster and asked if our mail had stopped being delivered. And she said, indeed, it had. And he said, why? And she said, because delivering your mail is a safety hazard. He said, I don't understand. And she said, well, bending down and delivering your mail is a safety hazard for the mail carrier. And we're not going to deliver your mail again until you get a new mailbox. And he said, well, how were we supposed to know this? Why didn't you put a note on or inside of our mailbox? And she said, because that's a safety hazard. So I did what I do best, and I went and I blogged about this story. And it's the kind of story, Lori, we all have, right? It could be my exasperation with, you know, the Postal Service that afternoon, or it could have been with an airline or the cable company or in a medical office. But then a commenter on my blog said, if I didn't feel like the post office cared about me as a person, in fact, if I didn't feel like I mattered to them, what had I done to make the postal carrier feel like he mattered to me? And that just took me aback. I had to stop for a second. And I thought to myself, well, I never explained to him that we had ordered a new mailbox. I never apologized to him that he had to now bend down to deliver the mail. I hadn't interacted with him at all. So that afternoon I went running outside when I saw his truck, and he saw me running down the block after him. He's a very large man, and he starts to run away because he assumes that I'm out there to yell at him. And I was just out there to apologize to him. But the lesson for me here was that this is what I had been thinking about for a while, which is that both he and I were participating in a system. We were voluntarily participating in a system that made each one of us matter less, not only to each other, but to the system as a whole. And that's what I want to talk about today. How can we make people matter more, which requires creating systems where people can be known, can be heard, can be co-creators in that system. So look around anywhere in any ecosystem, and you're going to find a whole bunch of people yelling that they don't matter. My personal mini-epiphany, that's a mini-epiphany in this regard, was I was president of my congregation a few years ago here in New York, and was getting a whole bunch of complaints by email, of course. The doors were locked. I didn't get my thank you note. Nobody greeted me when I came in the building. And then I got an email from an elderly congregant, and she said I was sick last week, and nobody called, even though I didn't tell anybody. And I thought, this is just the most ridiculous thing ever, right? Nobody knew you were sick. Why were we supposed to call? And, you know, I thought about that example and looking around and hearing people, you know, yelling in waiting rooms for the doctor, or going for your medical appointment. Maybe this doesn't happen so much in Canada, but Lori, but certainly here, and the first 10, 15 minutes is spent talking about your insurance instead of talking about you as a person. All of this adds up to a great big feeling like we don't matter as people. And I thought perhaps we could just start with any examples that folks have about when and how they have felt like they don't matter. I don't know if one of the Loris might have an example of that.
Yeah, I'm actually going to call on Lori Halley here, and Farha's just going to unmute her. And if you guys have comments, feel free to put them into the chat box and share some ideas. But Lori had a good story that she wanted to share. Lori, are you with us? Hi.
I'm here. So yes, a few years ago I volunteered. I was doing some virtual volunteering for an organization, just doing some promotion and media relations from home. But then a friend of mine said they really needed help at their event, and would I come and help? So I did. When I got there, I really wasn't sure where to go or what to do, and finally, after asking a few people, they said I should help with the silent auction. So me and another volunteer, we tried desperately to figure out what was, you know, required of us, and we did our best. And then the event started rolling on, and the speaker was on the stage, and people were sitting down and eating. And I thought to myself, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. So finally, after a while, I just sat down and listened to the speaker. And afterwards, I sort of just, you know, wondered about seeing if I could help. And I have to say, you know, I was quite surprised because I felt totally abandoned. And here I was giving my afternoon and evening up. And I thought, well, I guess I'll just chalk this up to a bad experience and I won't get involved with them again. But interestingly enough, the next year, they got in touch with me again and asked me to help with their media relations. And I said, surprisingly, I said, no, I wouldn't be helping. So that's my volunteer experience recently.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing a few other answers come in here. One from Janet, you know, she felt she didn't matter when she was skipped over at a meeting. Everyone was asked their opinion except for her. And then here someone has, you know, when your boss consistently doesn't answer your emails, that doesn't make you feel very good. Here's one from Anita, asking for a seat in a crowded bus for my older mother. The person wouldn't give her seat. Oh, I take the subway every day, Anita, and I'm always amazed at that kind of behavior. And then here's another one. I'll just read out one or two more. Going to when I'm at the bottom of the agenda in a meeting and we run out of time to discuss what I'm working on. So, you know, when you don't make a time enough for everyone to speak and you don't have some kind of follow-up. And maybe just one more here. So let's see, whenever I read an article, this is from Eric, whenever I read an article that overgeneralizes, for instance, everyone hates broccoli, I like broccoli, and I don't fit that generalization. That's an interesting one. So he feels like he doesn't matter to the author, so when things are too general. So I'll pass it back to you, Allison.
That was terrific, Lori, and I think what's really interesting is we were hearing stories and experiences from people who are from both inside organizations and outside of them. And that's something I want us to hold on to as we go through the webinar. That matterness is both an internal and an external experience. So what is it about organizational life in particular that is working so hard to make people not matter? And let's put this in a little bit of context, because I've been, as you mentioned, I've been researching and writing about social media and people and organizations for the last 10 years. And the reason for this book is I looked up about 2 years ago and said, well, we all know that people have a greater voice now than they ever had before. They have the ability to organize and to share and to protest and to criticize. And instead of changing, there were too many organizations that were doubling down on command and control. So I really wanted to dig in and figure out, what is that about? Because we need organizations to be different in order to make people matter. So the first thing is that fortress organizations, as Beth and I call them in the network nonprofit, those that see themselves as standalone hierarchies that are organized by command and control, they tend to have outsized fears about the world. It's not that the fears are entirely untrue, Lori, it's that they allow the fears to take control of the organization. So when you look out from behind your high walls and wide moats and assume that most people out there are wingnuts and wackadoodles just getting ready to attack you, it makes more sense to sit behind your walls, right? That's why risk assessment becomes so important in organizations. If you assume that out on the social media channels is a chaotic mess of incivility, then it makes sense to avoid those channels. And finally, of course, if the world can't be controlled, then we can't engage with it. And certainly that idea of control, Lori, runs through organizational life like nothing else, because it feeds into fear-based organizations, right? If you are scared of the world, then the only thing you can do in reaction is try to control everything, try to control process, try to control messages and messengers, try to control people, staff people. That's where a lot of that lack of matterness of staff people is coming from. The idea that the job of leadership is not to engage with people, not to hear what they have to say, but to try to control their actions or keep them quiet, has those very bad outcomes to them. So this is one reason why we have a lack of matterness. And the second is the churn. The churn is just the major epidemic of organizational life, right? The churn is what creates the Dilbert cartoons. The churn is all of the internal processes and to-dos and checkpoints and bureaucracy that comes with modern organizational life. The churn is why I was trying to return an item of clothing a few weeks ago to a company, and they're arguing with the woman because I couldn't find her SKU identifying number for the item. It's her number. I don't care. I just want to return the thing. The churn is what keeps organizations facing inward instead of facing outward. And there are two things I'd really like people to take away from the webinar today, Lori. One is that both the fears and the churn are a choice. These are choices that leaders make about their organizations. And two, part of what happens with the churn for voluntary associations of any kind is that too much work is laid onto professional staff because they bought entirely into a service model, that our job is to serve members. That is an exhausting way to work, and it's a really bad model that we've taken from businesses like a Nordstrom, right, that you're there just to serve people instead of trying to create a community of people who have a common purpose. And all of those people in that ecosystem, whether they're internal or external, have a lot to contribute to the creation and the management of that system. That lessens the burden on staff but it does require giving up control and reduces the churn. Lori, does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Are we getting any questions here yet, Farhad? I think I'm still trying to digest it, actually, Allison, so keep going.
Yeah, no, it's a lot, right? But you have to start to think about the fact that we have absorbed so much of organizational life as default settings, as just the way business has to be. We always have to be on, for instance. Whereas there's, for instance, a Volkswagen plant in Germany that decided about 18 months ago to shut down their servers for email from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. They said, we're going to take a break every night. Everybody shut down. There's an emergency, we can use telephones. And they are more profitable than ever. Right? So buying into the always-on idea is a choice, and buying into fear is a choice too.
So a few questions have come in.
Yeah.
Someone just wanted a bit more clarification on churn, and then a lot of questions are coming in about, how do you change the mindset? So. Yeah,
so changing the mindset is what the rest of our presentation is going to be. I'm not going to leave hundreds of people hanging here with an open question. But the churn is all about internal process, and the churn is about staff trying to do too much stuff. So when you're in a fear-based culture, Lori, process, trying to identify and stick to a command and control kind of process becomes all important. And that's where that whole burdensome bureaucracy of forms and people not having freedom to do anything comes in, right? It comes from leadership being worried about losing control. So they have to watch everybody work and watch how everybody works and check off all the check-off boxes in it. In addition to all that process, in fear-based organizations, what you have is a common culture, Lori, of trying to reduce risk, right? We're terrified of risk. So that's why we find so much time in staff meetings is devoted to what happens if something goes wrong. Everybody has sat in meetings where somebody comes up with a new idea and the rest of the meeting is spent with other people coming up with ways to poke holes in it and to say, well, this could go wrong and that could go wrong. And again, this is a choice. This is a cultural choice for organizations because anything could go wrong. What gets lost in those conversations is that they're not likely to go wrong.
Yeah.
And so it becomes almost impossible to take a risk in those kinds of cultures.
Yeah, and I just want to read out what Mary responded to that. She said that this is what you just described is exactly the problem with her organization. And I thought this was interesting. She said, our board creates programs to serve members. The members feel entitled to complain when they don't meet their expectations. Yeah. And yet they fail to involve members in the planning and ask their opinions ahead of time. And at the same time, members don't come forth when they ask, for suggestions or volunteering. So it's a catch-22, she says.
I think that's just right, but it has to begin with the organization. It's not going to begin with members, right? It has to begin with the organization making people known and asking them individually, at least to start, before the programs and strategy are all wrapped up with a bow, what do you think? What would you like? How can you help us? And that becomes a culture and a way of working. What I also need to throw into this part of the conversation, Lori, is that there is a greater urgency to change now because of social media. It used to be that organizations could behave like fortresses behind their walls because it was really hard to see who was in there and how were they working. But social media takes the walls down, whether leadership likes it or not. You can use a website like Glassdoor to critique leaders, and I've actually seen people lose their jobs because of that. And so how an organization works is now visible to the world in a way it never was. How leadership treats people internally and externally is visible, and this is creating a great urgency to change. So let's switch gears and let's start to talk about how we can matter in organizations and in cultures. So, Lori, let's think about when and how an organization has made people feel like they matter.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask people to share that, but while the answers are coming in, I'll share a very brief story about the time I felt very valued, and it was a volunteering experience for a very large festival. And talk about churn, I mean, there's thousands of internal processes happening, but the volunteer coordinators were so amazing that every morning, so this is a 3-day thing, every morning they gave us sort of a pep talk, and almost, they said, this is not possible without you guys. And so it really made us felt very appreciated from the start, and then they're very clear about what we need to do, and then always asked our insight and opinions about how the day was rolling out. And at the end of it all, not only did they give us a nice thank you email, but the main coordinator took us all out for drinks, something that she personally did, and then got us extra tickets to this other movie, to this other theater festival, and it was just amazing. It was so amazing that I literally, to go back, I'd have to take off 2 vacation days, which I really value, but I felt so part of something by what they did that I want to go back. Yeah. So I don't know, Allison, feel free to look at some of these answers coming in too, for ones that stick out to you, but let's see. So the thank you notes are stuff we're hearing from people, getting a really nice personal thank you note, which I think is key, as opposed to a more generic one. Let's see, by being included in debriefs, I think is a really important one. That's from Liz. Let's see what else we've got here. I feel like I matter when I hear from members. I recently received a thank you note for the work I do from a member who wanted to connect on LinkedIn. So that's a neat way of connecting afterwards. Any other ones standing out? Someone just listened to me, didn't interrupt, so just feeling listened to can sometimes make the difference. Yeah. Signing happy birthdays, knowing when your birthdays are. Yeah.
So I think what's so lovely about these suggestions, Lori, is how modest people are in their expectations of what it takes for them to matter, right? It takes a name, it takes being known and recognized, and part of the enormous disconnect of modern life is the assumption by so many organizations that efficiency trumps everything. Right? That's what the churn is largely about. It's about efficiency measures, right? How can we work really quickly? And in an efficiency kind of environment, we use tools like a constant contact to bundle people up and treat them like they don't have a name, right? Treat them like large generic batches of whatever they're supposed to do for you, right? They're large batches of donors or of volunteers or of members. And associations in particular are the kinds of places where people desperately want to be known. They want to be known by their name. They want to be valued. They want to be asked their opinions. So if we can start to flip the switch, right, changing this culture begins with a fundamental premise of truly believing that people are smart and generous and kind and are waiting to help. We can all look online, Lori, any day and find people doing just horrible things, right? There are parts of the internet that no sane person should go and spend any time in. Whoops, I went forward too quickly. But and that can be overwhelming. That feeds back into that fear that we talked about a little while ago. The fact is that people are overwhelmingly kind and generous. We are wired to be that way. And when we're asked to be our best selves, internally and externally, it feels great. It feels great as the leader, somebody who's doing the asking, and it feels great as the participant. What's super duper important for people within organizations to remember is that just moving quickly is not the same as being effective. So taking the time to send a personal note to somebody via email, or even better, a handwritten note, has such an enormous long-term impact. All of the data about the importance of keeping current customers, which is, I think it was something like 7 times less expensive than having to go out and find a new one, requires us to treat people like we value them and to actually listen. So, you know, part of the problem with the way that social media has been used by organizations over the past decade is that they continue to use them like the old broadcast tool set, right? So they use Facebook as a big billboard of look how great we are and come to our sessions and look at us, look at us. And the most powerful part of social media is that they are, by definition and design, conversational tools. They are meant for people to ask and answer questions, but organizations are not designed to ask and answer questions. Organizations are generally designed to just broadcast happy messages. So when we combine the goodness of people, and I am Pollyanna-ish about this, I understand that, with the social media toolkit, we have an opportunity to change the relationship between inside and out. We have an opportunity to turn people in our ecosystems internally and externally from passive doers into active participants and co-creators. So once we get into that mindset, Lori, we can start to do some interesting things, right? So here we have the fact that people and their stories matter. Organizations are accustomed to telling people's stories for them. Again, one of the powers of social media is that we don't need to tell people stories for them. They're quite capable of telling their own stories. This is a screenshot from a group called Benevolent, started by Megan Kashner outside of Chicago. And what Megan has done is created a hub for people who are struggling to get some traction economically to come on and tell their own stories and get a little bit of help. The amounts people ask for, in this case, some equipment. Sometimes it's that somebody has gotten a waiter job and doesn't have the clothing for it, or somebody finally gets their apartment but has nothing to furnish in it. And they're looking for hundreds of dollars. They're not looking for thousands of dollars, and these are one-time contributions for them. But the difference of Megan setting up Benevolent as the place where she tells people stories, she collects the money and brokers it and gives it out to people, versus people telling their own stories and other people on the outside like us, you know, being engaged to help them, is enormously powerful. And I think that association folks could really think about how can we help people to tell their own stories within our network about their work or about how they've been empowered by the work of the association in very powerful ways.
And so is that what you mean, Allison, by co-creator, sharing their stories, giving them the means to do that?
So that is part of co-creation. More broadly, Lori, what I think of co-creation is traditionally organizations are supposed to develop strategy internally in a windowless boardroom somewhere, and then they tell the world, you know, we're going to do this program this year, this service this year, this conference this year, and your job on the outside is to passively just do what you're told to do, which frankly doesn't feel good to anybody. And it might have worked when people had fewer choices and could see, you know, less about organizations. It doesn't work well now. There are too many choices for people to participate in things that feel good or not participate at all. In addition, it is losing the opportunity to tap into all of that creativity and expertise of your network of people. So co-creation to me means not tying everything up with a bow and saying, here's what we're doing this year. Co-creation means being in conversation, which we'll get to in just a second, and asking people, what do you think about this idea? How should we do this? What else would you want us to do? And that gets us out of the service business and into the community business. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and this might be a good question to segue into the next part, but I'm seeing lots of questions coming in. Thanks, everyone. What happens if past outreach, when you've asked people to contribute, or you've asked their opinion, or you want to get them involved, and you get nothing back. How do you change your ask, and how do you convince them to get more involved?
So you've got to show people instead of tell people. And the way to begin showing people is you, as what we call network weaver, right, the host of this party, you need to seed your network with some people to participate. So if you're going out with a big ask in the next few days, and big ask meaning, we want to do a program in the spring, and we're not quite sure what to do. We've done these kinds of things in the past, but we know other people like these other kinds of things. What do you think? And if you haven't seeded the network and you don't have a culture of being in conversation with people, it is likely that you're going to get crickets out there. So what you need to do is you need to email some of your friends in the network. Nothing wrong with seeding the network. You're not cheating. And say to them, I need your help getting this conversation started. And at least get a little back and forth. Now here's a big change in behavior, Lori. What we're used to seeing when organizations ask for input is just window dressing of input, right? It's I like this red instead of this blue for the logo. And then the organization goes back behind closed doors and makes the decision they wanted anyway. If we're really going to ask people to participate, then we have to really honor their engagement. So if you've seeded that conversation with some participants and you start to get a little conversation, a little traction going, that's going to take some practice. It's not going to happen right away. But let's say you get a little traction going and people are saying, what I'd really like is I would like to see 5 events in 5 cities around the country where we can talk about these kinds of things and maybe engage with other people, and it starts to snowball a little bit. And it's likely that some of the things that people want to do may be outside of the scope of what you have the capacity to do. Your job is not to pretend to be all in favor and then go back behind closed doors and change it. Your job is to be open and engaging with people and explain what you have the capacity to do, and hopefully to accept at least some of their suggestions, because if you're asking people for input and you really aren't willing to take it in any way, then please don't ask for it. I mean, that's just downright insulting. So you have to have the culture, again, to be open with communities of people, open for them to help shape what you do, but the organization also has to be honest with people about what the real parameters are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I just want to share a quick story about that with Wild Apricot. We had support was down for a bit, and we actually shared with our community a very open letter from our CEO about, this is what's happening, sorry, and we were very open about it. We weren't hiding it, and it took guts to do that, but people really appreciated it, and I think it made them feel they mattered. So that brings up Jessica here has asked, and this ties into the fearfulness, Allison, of if you ask for feedback and you give the 2 sides, you give people the ability to contribute, and some respond saying they love it and want to do things, and others hate it and respond badly. How do you address that? How do you address the negativity?
So I think, look, organizations need to be able to weed out 2 things, because we have been inculcated to think that we hear any criticism as like screaming, flame-throwing, the sky is falling kinds of remarks. My experience has been, Lori, that generally people don't hate things. What they do when they react that strongly, and they're not a troll, we're in the mainstream of people here, because a troll you just want to ignore. The mainstream of people is people get very upset when they're not listened to. That's what underlies that increase of volume for people. And if they didn't care at all, they wouldn't get angry, to the level that they do. And if you have a lot of people who like something, and then you've got a loud contingent of people who don't like something, you've got to take those people, if this has happened online, you've got to take them offline and you've got to get in conversation with them. Because there is some disconnect somewhere between what you're trying to do and what they're hearing. they have something important to tell you, and generally it's not about the program that happened. It's about some slight that happened, or that they weren't listened to, or they had felt marginalized. It's really, really important to listen to people who are very upset. And so much of organizational culture is about trying not to hear them. Here, I'll give you a statistic, Lori. 70% of complaints to specific companies on Twitter go unanswered. 70%. So,
Yeah.
right, so the natural human reaction is, gee, I don't want to hear anybody yell at me. Like the postman running down the street as I'm running after him, right? Generally, it rings really loud in organizations when people are upset, but also generally it's not nearly as many people as it feels, and they're not angry at you. They're angry about some generally relatively benign something that got blown up. In addition, once you have listened to them, they can become your best friend and your best ambassadors if they think you really do care about them.
Well, and on that note, I just want to share this nice comment from Gwyneth. And sorry, it's a bit self-congratulatory. When I shared that story, when we were very honest about, we haven't been able to respond with our support team, Gwyneth was saying she really appreciated getting that because it made us seem like humans, and they're humans too. And even you and I were talking about that, Allison, like if something went wrong in this webinar, it's like, that's okay, we're humans. And I think that's what you mean when you get to talk to people like, well, what's really going on here? And not all of us are perfect. We're not well-oiled corporate machines, and things happen, and we try to make the best. Yeah, so I think
that's right. And right, at the heart of what gets people really angry, though, is not feeling like they matter. I mean, there is some real human the essence of humanity that feels like it's being atomized and bureaucratized in the world, and that's what makes people angry.
Right.
So let me go, Lori, let me push through a couple of more slides, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Okay. So just like taking our strategy out in public, one thing that organizations generally shy away from, and again, I think lose the power of their network to bring their ingenuity and creativity, is public problem solving. In fact, we do so little of it. I had a very hard time finding examples for the book, and had to make one up. What I thought a good scenario would be, there is a great overemphasis inside of organizations to try to pretend to be perfect. This is Lori, this is the opposite of rehumanizing ourselves, that we were just talking about, right? The pretense that everything always goes right internally, or that we know all the answers, is just an enormous waste of energy. Of course, we don't know all the answers, and we're not perfect. And the more human we can make ourselves, in fact, the more vulnerable we make ourselves, the more attractive we make ourselves. That is actually biologically a truth. And organizations, particularly I think associations, should feel freer to go out to the membership and say, gee, we're really struggling with this. Can you help us to figure out why people aren't coming for certain programs, or what we're doing in our communications that isn't hitting the mark? And again, not through kind of antiseptic surveys, but through conversation, where people can explore and get creative. This is a website, See Click Fix, that puts public municipalities on notice of things to fix. It's not really about co-creating solutions, but what it does that's interesting is it will keep these complaints up until they're fixed, which makes governments accountable in a way that they never have been. We don't need associations, I think, to be forced into accountability that way, but I do want to urge leadership within organizations, within associations, to think about their membership as all potential problem solvers. And again, that changes the dynamic between inside and out. Oh, and of course, thinking about staff as problem solvers as well.
Right, and sorry, just quickly to follow up on that, and I do want to be aware of time because there's 15 minutes left, but Dawn was saying, if you do put the problem out on social media, like that site, do you as the organization, you're supposed to respond to the problem on social media publicly, or would you respond privately?
So it depends on where you're having the conversation and what you want to have happen, right? If you wanted to show the world writ large that, you know, you're open to discussing problems with people, then you do have to respond where you started the conversation. You could, but given that we're talking about membership associations, you could be having this conversation on, say, a private Facebook group or, you know, Yammer, you know, some other private site, and just make it a, you know, members only kind of conversation. But again, Lori, the outside sphere of the world is the assumption that the world cares so much about our, you know, how our organizations work or whether we make a mistake or not, and that can be really paralyzing. There's nothing that's going to go so wrong in public that the world seeing that we're human is going to make the sky fall. It just doesn't. Now, it is a leadership problem, though. If you're working within an organization where there is no margin for error, where leadership is basically paralyzing staff into fear if someone makes a mistake, then you can't operate that way. Right?
Right.
So when we're out in public, online, we need to make the switch from broadcasting to being in conversation with people. AARP does a great job of this. AARP also has dozens of staff people using their own names and faces who are out on Twitter and engaging the public around the work. It's really, really important. If we're going to rehumanize ourselves at our work, we've got to step out from behind the logo. I've never actually spoken to a logo that speaks back to me. I speak to people. And there is no reason in the world not to train, support, prepare staff, your best ambassadors, the ones who know the work the best, to be out on the social channels and in conversation. Organizations need to practice, Lori. We are so accustomed to broadcast. We are so accustomed to communicating by press release that it's very difficult for organizations to make the switch to ask people meaningful questions. And it does take a little bit of time to practice doing that. And people should not be discouraged if it takes a little while. I was once in the social media training, and at the end of the second full day, a woman yelled in front of her laptop, she yelled, "Eureka!" And we said, "What's Eureka?" And she said for weeks she was on her Facebook group talking to parents in her network. She ran an independent school, and nobody had responded to her. Finally, she said, "For tomorrow's meeting, should we have bagels or muffins?" And somebody came back and said bagels. And that's when she yelled Eureka, because it's the first time she didn't feel alone. But it was also the first time she asked a question somebody could answer. Right? She had been asking these like great big philosophical questions. So it takes a little bit of practice, but it's so powerful to be in conversation with your people. That is the only way to find out if you're hitting the mark or not, and to plug into their creativity. So fundamentally, at the biggest level, the idea of matterness means starting to work with people instead of at them, right? And that is that switch of being in conversation with them. This is Spartan Race. It's an obstacle course company. They do obstacle courses all around the U.S. and maybe North America, I'm not sure. And they're only, I think, 3 years old. And these obstacle courses apparently can make a Marine blush. I mean, they are some serious stuff. One of the permissions one has to sign for the hardest course is that I know I may die in this race. So it's certainly not something I'm going to be doing anytime soon. But the people who participate feel so much a part of this effort. They don't feel like customers. As one of them put it to me, I don't feel like a number in these races. I feel like a person. I'm greeted when I get there with my name. They send them all sorts of information about how to prepare for the race. They are supported during the race. And then, just as importantly, the conversation continues on the group's Facebook page later as they recap the race, talk about their experiences, share new ideas with the company. And in 3 years, they have over 4 million followers on Facebook through this effort. So Listen, this is really important, Lori. Part of the churn is that it sucks the joy out of working, right? Because we're so overwhelmed with everything we have to do and all the forms we have to fill out and all the risk aversion we have to do. And I hope people can remember that engaging with other human beings at some level has to be fun, right? We're trying to do something together. We're trying to support people, and the nonprofits change the world. And we have to find places to infuse it with some fun. This is the picture from a credit union in Boise, Idaho, that was opening up a new branch, and went all around Boise with gift cards to give people to just celebrate the opening of their branch. And they took YouTube videos of people getting these gift cards, and it was just fun. And the local TV station picked it up, and they just celebrated. So instead of buying a whole lot of paid media of newspaper ads and TV commercials, they just went out person to person and did this. And I thought it was just a really effective way of making the people who got the cards matter and reminding people that credit unions are the kinds of places where people really do matter a lot more than the large commercial banks. And finally, Lori, organizations value what they measure, right? And that generally comes down to efficiency measures because they're so easy to grab, right? So how many people did we touch? How many members do we have? How many meetings did we have? How many people in the webinars did we have? All of those outputs, and plus the financials, become the measures that are used by senior leadership and by boards to define the success of an organization. If you want people to matter more within your ecosystem, then you have to measure matterness. And the only way to measure that is to be in conversation with people, is to actually ask them, do you feel like you matter to us? Do you feel like we know you as a person, or do you feel like a number? Are we listening to you? Are we engaging you as a full human being? Do you feel like you know who's inside of our association and what we do, who we are as people? There are a whole bunch of questions I have in the book of how to help people to matter more. I think this needs to be a fundamental part of organizational life. And our final slide, Lori, is these are the ways that people can start to infuse their work and their organizations with more matterness. And now I'm happy we could just take some questions, Lori, in chat.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what you said, Allison, was, the biggest thing is just kind of to be human. And, everything you're saying to reduce the distance between your organization, your constituents, it's like just talk about your stories, ask their opinion, be in conversations, have fun. To me, that just sounds like being, human with your members instead of this, I think, professional front that we all feel that we need to put on. So with that, I'm going to ask people to put in their questions. And I know there is one that came in, which I think is interesting, someone from South Africa. So thanks for joining us, Palisa. What are some other ways to engage if you're not really on social media? So, how would you ask people their opinion, or how would you create conversations if you're not really on all those channels?
The best way to do it, I think, is small groups in person. Gathering up 10 people at, a convenient location, like using a meetup style, event that says, okay, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, which of our members in Wichita want to go to Starbucks for coffee and have a chat? And I think as spontaneous feeling and casual feeling as you can get will make it fun and social for people, which is really important because we all know how busy everybody is, and to get people in conversation. So I think we need to build into our work a lot of opportunities for more social, smaller gatherings of people to get to know one another better, to share experiences, to share expertise that will then seep into the broader work.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the online, offline approach is the way to go.
Yep.
On that note, this question came up a lot earlier in your presentation, but I think it's really relevant because we all deal with it. You're saying it sounds like the way you make people feel mattered is very individualistic. You're responding to them as individually. But if you're sending out blasts, email blasts, and people are on a list, and you have to do that because, I'm sure a lot of people on the call today, you've got only so much time to run these volunteer organizations on the side of your job. How do you use these emails and these lists and use the little time that you have to make people feel they really matter?
So there are a number of ways of doing that. One, I do understand that we do have to have some efficiency tools in place. As much as I might dislike them, I understand the reality of that. Now, when those tools, so let's say that we're sending out an email blast, Lori, saying next Friday we're having a conference call or a webinar on this topic, and generally that's it. It's just a static communication. There is an opportunity within that communication to put a link to a blog post that could start a conversation before that call, right? So within this larger topic of, say, HR, we can give people an opportunity to help shape the webinar. What is it that you're most struggling with or most challenged by in regards to HR? Is it hiring? Is it firing? Is it evaluations? And get people who are interested in that topic to at least shape some of it. So that's one way to balance. The other thing to do is to use the social media channels, Lori, as an opportunity to celebrate an individual member, which shows other people how you feel about members, right? It's not saying I'm going to list every single member and say something nice about them because that's not possible. But you have stories within your membership, within your ecosystem, that are fantastic, and you can ask people, come on Facebook, share your own story, and it represents the feelings and stories of a lot of members, and it shows that the organization values members as people. So you can do those two things to help infuse the macro with the micro.
Yeah, and here Susan asked a question, how do you do this with very little paid staff? And I think someone else on the call basically answered that with his question, which is how do you get members to talk to each other?
Yeah.
So that's another way around it. So and I think that, so how do you get members to talk to each other? And then Peter's also asked, can you explain how you use scenarios to create conversation starters, not stoppers?
Yeah. Okay, so that last part, Lori, hold on to that for a second because I'll forget it by the time we're ready to talk about that, so you have to remind me, okay? So, but to back up, the first part of the conversation is the assumption that staff need to do all of this, right? So that's part of that controlling, command and control structure, old-fashioned idea. There are members who might want to volunteer to help you manage, say, your Facebook group or your Twitter feed, or just as themselves to help organize conversations. Maybe they're younger staff. Maybe they're somebody who just enjoys these kinds of conversations. It's very, very important for staff to be willing to take the walls down and to spread out the work in some ways, because that's what social media can do best. And the Foreign Policy Association, I think it was Foreign Policy Association, I might not be correct about that, but I know it was in DC, I know it was about foreign policy, did not have the capacity to run their Twitter feed and found a graduate student at GW who volunteered to do it. So we have to have a more expansive understanding of network capacity, not just paid staff capacity. And then there was using scenarios to create conversation starters is really important, Lori. This is how do we get out of the total risk aversion where we can't allow anything to happen. because something bad or scary is possible. And the way to do that is to use scenarios around the table. So for instance, I have a story in the book about the CEO of a very large social service agency who said to me, I can't possibly use Twitter. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm going to be in an airport and somebody's going to tweet, you and your organization suck. That was his word. And I said, what's wrong with that? And he said, I'm Irish. I'm going to tweet back, you suck. I said, well, okay. So generally, that's the conversation stopper, right? Something bad could happen, so we can't go out on these channels, or we can't open up to conversation, or whatever it is, right? The scenario is to say, all right, now push forward into your discomfort one more step. I said, what happens after you say you suck? He goes, I guess I'd have to apologize. And I said, could you imagine doing that? He said, yeah, I could do that. I apologize all the time. I said, and then what happens? And his communications director yells out from the back, then everybody would know you're a real guy who's really passionate about the work. So whatever the scenario, say for instance, if the idea of opening up a future, conference or webinar to co-creation among members feels really scary, that we're going to be forced to do things that we don't want to do, then you just have to push people past that first conversation stopper and say, well, what happens next and what happens next to alleviate the fears?
Right. Okay. Those are amazing insights, Allison. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to wrap it up there, but everyone, we saw all your comments and questions come in, and we're going to work with Allison to maybe figure out how we can answer them personally. I mean, here we are struggling with the same issue that you all do, right? Trying to respond to you individually, but you do matter, and we want to thank you for submitting all these great questions. There's some really good stuff in there, so we do hope to respond. Allison, do you want to show your next slide and just let people know about where they can follow you?
Sure.
And she's got a great website. You've got a great blog, Allison, with all this kind of stuff written out, and that's great stuff. And we can tweet that out, and we'll send that out to people. And I'm just going to take control here, Allison. I just want to
thank you for having me.
Thank you too. That was great insight on how to make people feel mattered. We'll recap that for everyone, what the main points were, and this will be recorded and shared on our website. And I just want to let you guys know about our upcoming webinar with Toby Johnson. This will be during Volunteer Week on how to convert your volunteers from joiners to stayers. So, we'll be talking about that onboarding process, and as well as, the must-haves you need for getting people trained through that whole process. So that's going to be really great. Toby's amazing. She's got tons of volunteer experience. You can register on our website. And I also want to let people know, flipping through the next slide here, that we have a small membership advisory community where we try to take these bigger lessons and make it smaller in peer-to-peer group learning talks and discussions. So this is for us our way to talk to you in a smaller scale. So if you're interested in joining, Farhad, if you could just share that link with everyone in the chat, which you did, you can sign up there. It's a WUFU form, and we'll send you a notification of our next session, which is after Toby's webinar, and we're going to be talking about your experience with your volunteers. So that's always great. It's always great to hear what other clubs and organizations are up to. And on that note, we want to thank you for taking the time today, for participating in our webinar. And for those who don't know about Wild Apricot, we encourage you to check out our website. We provide membership or association management software. And we do have a 30-day free trial. And our support team is amazing. So if you have questions, you can always just call them. So thank you for joining. This has been great. And we hope to see you at the next webinar on volunteering. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.